Hey everyone, my name is Essa and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I will be teaching you the general interface of Photoshop. If that sounds interesting, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Okay, let's get started. When you first open Photoshop, you'll be met with this screen. This is known as the home screen. From here, you have three options. As it says, you can drag and drop an image file, open a past project, or create a new project. In the top left corner, we have the Photoshop logo. When we press this, it will take us into the main workspace. By default, Photoshop will load the Essentials Workspace preset. You can check what preset you're on by clicking onto Windows and hovering over Workspace. The Essentials Workspace can be divided into 6 sections. The first section is the main work area. This is where your project will show up. To the left of that, you have the Tools panel. And at the top, you have the Options panel. Now the Options panel links directly to the Tools panel, and it will change depending on the tool you have selected. So right now I am selected on the Move tool, and it gives me options for alignment and various other things. But if I select onto the Brush tool, you'll see it then changes to give me options for opacity, flow, smoothness, and brush size and brush hardness, which are properties of the Brush tool. To explain the sections on the right, I'm going to go ahead and import a stock photo of some mountains. Okay, so the first section on the right that you need to know about is what I like to call the Tabs panel. This contains a bunch of icons which open up to some menus that you will use every so often but don't need to be visible all the time. By default, in the Essentials Workspace preset, the only one in here is the History menu. The History menu is a massive log of everything you do in your project. So as you can see, when I click onto here, the only thing listed is open, and that is because I've obviously opened this image file. If I go ahead and apply a crop to my image, a square crop, you can see that now in the history panel it says cropped. And if I click on the open again, it will restore the image back to what it was. So it kind of works like a undo and redo process. The next section is pretty straightforward. This is the Colors, Swatches, Gradients and Patterns section. Color is pretty simple, it lets you pick any color from the 16 million plus RGB spectrum. Swatches is a way of saving colors. By default, Photoshop will give you a bunch in sorted groups. To create your own swatch, simply pick a color in the spectrum, go to Swatches and press the plus in the bottom corner. Give it a name and then press onto OK, and then you will have a new swatch. The next tab is Gradients. Gradients are a fade or transition between two or more colors. Similar to swatches, Photoshop will give you a bunch categorized by their colors. So for example, as you can see here, we have blues, purples, pinks, reds and oranges. You can also create your own gradients by pressing on the plus, choosing your 2 colors or more, then pressing on OK. The final tab is Patterns. This is a way of saving textures. Not many people use this, but Photoshop does give you some really nice simple ones such as trees, grass and water. Below that you have the Properties and Adjustments section. Properties is very similar to the Options toolbar in the way that its content changes depending on the type of layer you have selected. So in the current project, I only have one layer, which is this stock photo of some mountains. And the content it displays to me is Transform, which allows me to change the width and the height of the image, X and Y, which is the position of the image. X is horizontal and Y is vertical. I can change the angle of the image, and I have some quick buttons to flip the image horizontally or vertically. I also have alignment options and some quick actions. The Adjustments tab in Photoshop is pretty straightforward. It basically contains a bunch of shortcuts to commonly used image adjustments. So in here you have things like brightness and contrast, levels, curves, hue saturation, black and white, etc. When you use one of these shortcuts, it automatically creates an adjustment layer. Adjustment layers are good because they work with the Properties panel, allowing you to actively modify them, and they also allow for non-destructive editing, which is very important. So for this current project, I'm going to go ahead and add a brightness and contrast image adjustment. And as you can see, it automatically switches the tab to Properties to allow me to modify it. And in our Layers panel, there is now a new layer called Brightness and Contrast. In the Properties panel, it gives us the option to play around with the sliders ourselves or press on this button which says Auto. Auto basically allows Photoshop to use its AI and decide what it thinks is best for the photo. So as you can see, we've now got -21 brightness and 56 contrast, and this looks pretty good to me. To explain the layers panel, I'm going to go ahead and add some text to our project. This photo was taken in Canada at Banff National Park. So I'm going to go ahead and select the text tool from the left, and as you can see, the options bar at the top has changed, which now allows me to modify the font variation, font size and color of the text. I'm just going to leave it at the default right now. So Arial, regular, 72 points in size, smooth, central paragraphing and white. And then I'm going to click onto my workspace. When I click onto my workspace, this will create a new text layer. I'm going to type out Canada and then press the tick in the options bar. Now as you can see, 72 points in size is way too small for this project. So with the text layer selected, in the properties panel, I'm going to change the size to about 640 and change the color to black. And I'm also going to change the font to one of my personal favorites, BBAS. This project is made up of 3 layers. We have our background image, our brightness and contrast adjustment, and the Canada text we just created. You can see this in the bottom right panel. Next to each layer there is an eye icon. This toggles visibility. So for example, if I turn off the eye icon on our background image, you'll see that it disappears from the work area. If you have this checkered background, that means your project will be transparent. Turning the eye icon back on will bring the background image back. In the layers panel, by pressing this icon at the bottom, you also have the option to create groups. This allows you to sort out your layers and separate them and keep things organized. This is very useful, especially in bigger projects that contain many layers. In the layers panel, you can also enable a lock, which stops you from editing a certain layer. So for example, if I enable the lock on our Canada text, I can no longer move it with the move tool, and instead Photoshop will automatically select the next layer that is not locked. So in this case, the background. Above that, you have the ability to change the opacity, which is basically the transparent level of your layer. So for example, if I go ahead and unlock the Canada text and then bring the opacity down, you'll see it slowly starts to fade away. 0 is completely invisible and 100% is just fully visible. Next to that, you have blending modes. Blending modes can get quite complicated, so I'm going to make a separate video on that, but all you need to know about this is that it's a way of mixing 2 layers together. So in this case, I'm going to enable the overlay blending mode on our Canada text, just because it gives this nice effect. Above that, you have some search options for when you have a bigger project with hundreds of layers. So for example, if I click the T, it will show me all text layers. The next tab is channels. Channels is a way of breaking down your image into its 3 primary colors, red, green and blue. So as you can see in here, we have the red, green and blue channels and an RGB channel at the top. If you click onto one of these individual channels, so for example blue, you'll see that our image appears black and white. That's because it's showing us all the blues in our image. Same thing goes for the greens and the reds. And then if you press RGB at the top, it combines all 3 to show you your final image. This is used for a lot of advanced editing, so don't worry too much about this tab if you're just starting out. The Paths tab works directly with the pen tool. I'll go more into detail with this when I do a video on the pen tool. So that is pretty much a run through of the Essentials workspace in Photoshop. One last thing I'd like to mention is that Photoshop workspaces are fully customizable. This means you can move any panel or any section to a different location or change the size of them by simply dragging on these lines in between each section and adapt it to your personal preferences. One thing I like to do is close the Channels and Paths tab, since I don't use them that often. To do this, you can simply right click on the tab and then press close. This will get rid of it, and if I ever need them again, I can just go to Windows and they'll be in this list here. Another thing I like to do is always have my history panel visible in case I make mistakes. To do this, I can go to the icons section and right click on it and press on expand panels, and as you can see, it's now got a big column to itself. I also like to put properties on top of history, so I have a stacked column. This gives me more space for my layers panel and full visibility of the properties panel. But like I said, this is completely personal preference, so over time as you use Photoshop, you can adapt this to your needs. To save a custom preset, you can go to Windows, Workspace, and then press on New Workspace. You can give it a name, so I'm just going to call this Issa's Workspace, and then press on Save. And now whenever I load into Photoshop, If I want to go back to Essentials, I can press on Essentials, and if I want to go to my workspace, I can just press on it at the top here. So that's pretty much it for the general interface and workspace in Photoshop. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found that useful, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel with notifications on, and I'll see you all in the next video.